Welcome back to the Progress Report. I'm your host, Tom Rourke. We have a very special episode today, and I'm particularly looking forward to this given a personal background in design and experience. We're all very conscious of the rate at which AI is changing our experience of the world. But who are the people who are going to actually help shape what that experience and interaction are going to be? Delighted to be joined today by Kevin Bethune, who is a well-regarded author in the area of design and is president of design studio at ImagineCo, and my own friend and colleague Nicholas Kim, who is the global leader for Kyndryl Vital and Transformation. Kevin, Nicholas, you're both very welcome to the Progress Reports.
Really appreciate you having us.
Yep, thank you.
Maybe before we start, for our listeners, you might just kind of ground us in, your own personal journey to this moment in design. So maybe if I start with you, Kevin.
Yeah, so I found design mid-career, but based on the way the world is progressing, I'm very thankful for the timing. I started as a mechanical engineer in the nuclear power generation industry. That's where I cut my teeth on product creation in general. And then fast forward through grad school, ended up at Nike Inc., where Nike embodied the elements of business, technology, and creativity. And I started just scratching the itch to figure out what potentially could design mean for me as this brewing multidisciplinary professional. So hindsight being 2020, I would say curiosity has been my defining thread of just wanting to connect the dots more holistically.
That's excellent. And maybe Nicholas, I know that you started out with a combination of neuroscience and philosophy, which I'm super intrigued by, but maybe a little bit more about your journey to here.
Yeah. I think what Kevin mentioned in terms of curiosity really resonates. And so I think that's been a overarching theme for my career as well. To your point, Tom, I started my career as a neuroscientist and found design, I would say, through pure dumb luck in terms of Frog giving me a chance to really join their design studio and grow up with their design strategy practice. So was really fortunate to be there with the founder, Hartmut Esslinger, and other esteemed designers. And through that process, really got a front row seat to design and how that is approached and thought of. And then throughout the years, that really informed my point of view and perspective on other types of disciplines within brand, product, customer experience, etc.
Generally, just to get the conversation going, I have a question here, which is really, is this a moment where design is under pressure, or is this actually, design's greatest moment of opportunity?
I think it's an interesting time. We're at an inflection point. You could call it a two-sided coin. I think on one hand, the precedent of how design has influenced industries, global industry and global enterprises in general, is still nascent compared to the precedent set by what you would argue are conventional business disciplines. And even maybe thanks to the power of technology and software over the last couple of decades, perhaps technology has been a secondary sort of dominant voice. Design is still young at the table influencing things. So I think there's still perhaps different levels of design maturity or understanding about design's potential impact. And the paradigm of AI is an important one, but I think it shakes some of those precedents, some of those mentalities or attitudes toward design. But I think it's now our opportunity to show what design can do and what we're now living in, which is an exponential world fueled by AI.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that Kevin said, definitely I would echo. I think for me, I kind of think about my earlier part in my career as a neuroscientist. This all seems like a very full circle moment for me in some ways, just because there is this notion of artificial intelligence, of course, but it is built on the foundation of human understanding and innovation. And so throughout this kind of technology, it's informed by the human experience. When I think about design's role in that whole kind of landscape, is that design, to me, broadly speaking, is about making the interaction between human and AI, in this case, seamless, intuitive, and easy to do, essentially. And so I feel like design's opportunity here is like many of the things that we are oftentimes given the opportunity to participate in, is that we have the privilege and I would say the expertise to really connect the human experience with the artificial intelligent technology kind of capabilities.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you expose there, use the word experience. I mean, I think for a lot of people too, their understanding of what design is can sometimes be a little bit narrow. But I guess there are broader disciplines in design that are kind of coming more to the fore in this moment, particularly around experience design and research and understanding. And maybe just for the listener, you might just explain a little bit more about what are those disciplines that seem to be most valuable in this context.
At the end of the day, design for me is about creating the future, really synthesizing new stories that transform people or maybe communities of people. So with that said, when it comes to design disciplines that I think are going to be increasingly important, it's those creative lateral problem solvers, and they might have design in the title. They sometimes maybe they don't. Maybe there's adjacent fields that also participate in this idea of creative lateral thinking. But like I think of like systems design, I think of service design, I think of strategic design. Those capabilities that bring disparate disciplines together around a table, around a shared vision, shared clarity, and then we still deliver our deep expertise of the specific, design subdisciplines that are necessary to create the future state thing or system or artifact, whatever that might be.
The various fields that I were kind of spinning through my head were just more of the traditional, I would say, like the visual, the graphic, the product, the interaction designs for sure, they're getting affected. But then more broadly speaking, when I think about design as experience or facilitating experience, it is of the other folks, like whether it's human factors, ergonomics. I come from having worked in the car industry. And so understanding how a human interacts with the machine, literally the kind of motion and control of the car is handled through these types of interactions, but also considering the space and the auditory experience, the visceral experience, et cetera. And so car designers, audio designers, all these different types of experiences that would really kind of contribute to that human interaction with whatever that might be. I feel like all those fields will be certainly influenced and touched.
One of the phrases I loved about you and Kevin on your LinkedIn profile is this idea of a multidisciplinary misfit, right? And I think I might have mentioned this before. I can relate to that, right? But it is an interesting question for me about the pathways people take into what we might call design or human experience, or into the spaces in the interaction between AI and humans.
I do believe the future needs to be multidisciplinary, just because of the pace of change, the complexity of problems that are waiting to be solved. The world's a lot smaller. So we need to think more multidisciplinary. And also we need to value people maybe beyond the title that's presently on their business card, like really appreciate someone's lived experience. Because of how hyper-connected we are, we can't ignore the role that culture plays. We can't ignore the role that some of the cascading implications of every design or business decision plays in our reality or someone's reality, especially if we claim to be serving any audience. We need to be prepared to think through a multidisciplinary lens, a cultural lens, even a lens that considers historical imbalance, societal imbalance, because it's also like clearly in front of us more than it ever has been before.
And maybe we could just spend a little bit about talking about how these developments in technology have changed not only the value of the work, but the nature of how the work is done, and the kind of relative differences about like some parts of design that are going to get transformed in terms of how the work is done as much as the importance of the work. Maybe Kevin, your view.
Yeah, if I look backward, I think our field, the design field at large, has suffered a little bit from over fragmentation thanks to digital. And that, I know that's a wide umbrella, but the range of specialties or what design was valued for in different contexts is so hyper fragmented around like specifics around interface and affordance, or are we talking like systems from a digital product creation systems level, and so it calls into question like what parts of that fragmentation can now be automated thanks to AI. But in many respects, the algorithm is looking backward at backward facing patterns to like automate these things forward. And we should draw convenience from that to free ourselves up to hopefully spend more creative problem solving calories on the futures that we want to explore and eventually embody and realize. And so, it's almost like the fragmentation. Maybe we'll go through a renaissance of a repackaging of maybe hybridized capabilities and showing how design can connect disparate disciplines and problem-solving techniques together, but also still celebrate the deep nuances of our creative expertise.
A lot of the time, I feel like in our respective fields, a lot of the time is spent on some of these administrative, production-oriented types of activities that are required in order to express whatever we're trying to do or manifest that. But if those types of activities can be decreased, I would say, because these technologies allow us to, basically offload maybe those types of things. And so then we have more time and just more cognitive space to think about these other types of more creative, strategic activities. That to me is kind of where the real positive future lies. I can only think that if you had more energy, more time, like, what kinds of things can we think about? Because like for me, it's really astounding to see it's almost magical to see some of the output of these algorithms, but at the end of the day, they can't replicate, not even remotely close to like human ingenuity, taste, judgment, the framing of how we would even think about a challenge. Like AI has to take it very literally, but I think even when you ask these questions, my head goes through just how would I frame this in a different context.
Now I'm agreeing everything with what Nicholas is describing. If I'm, running a business, it's the big thinking is done by my business disciplines, my technologists, and design, unfortunately, still fighting through that misperception of, the nice to have. It's the final aesthetic step. And what did we see over the last couple of years? A lot of companies sort of hitting the creative disciplines first, not just design, even marketing, of downsizing those studios and departments. And we've watched the dismantling. We've watched an erosion of C-suites, excluding then what was the chief design officer, chief creative officer, or subordinating it under another discipline that was more conventionally understood. And so we've seen a regression in the impact, or at least the sponsorship for design. And I think that's been a mistake. And what I would love for us to see in the business climate is people recognizing that and standing up to sponsor design again. But hopefully the Renaissance version of design that we're talking about in this conversation, where we're enabling the hybrid, multidisciplinary, creative, lateral thinker to come in. Maybe came from design, maybe had experience in fields adjacent to design, but we're looking at them to be the creative problem solver, to map and to explore and sense make what the future might be.
If design as a profession wasn't more open, I would never have entered into this profession. I came from a neuroscience background. I was as nerdy can be, basically. And yeah, the fact that someone at Frog Design took the opportunity to just spend some time with me, and then just started to hear these kinds of themes that she thought were very consistent with a designer's mindset. I think if the design profession, to Kevin's point, was not more inclusive, was not considering these different perspectives, then it would be, I would say, kind of the death knell for the profession. It has to be, in my opinion, that's the DNA, I think, of a designer, is really pursuing that curiosity with the knowledge that it may not go anywhere, but when it does, it can lead to something really quite magical at the end of the day.
I guess there's a question I do have, though, but there is no escaping the need to engage with the technology. Is there a need for actually design to be more proactive in actually jumping into those technologies? And I don't just mean like the traditional ones people use for production and rendering, but I mean the experimenting, to experiment with the building of agentic technologies in the same way one would have experimented with, building with foam and paper and all of those things. Is there a kind of real need for the design profession to more directly embrace the engineering boundary, if you will?
Yeah, I think I view these latest emerging technologies, and definitely, generative AI being perhaps the one that's filling the zeitgeist more these days. But these are just ingredients. They're powerful ingredients that we can now design with. And if generative AI continues to permeate our day-to-day reality in the spaces and the objects we touch and the software and tools that we continue to use, knowing that it's going to be such an important paradigm that informs everything that we touch, design should have some agency, should really capitalize on the moment to make, to know, to iterate, to experiment, to not be afraid of it, to not put our head in the sand about it, but just play with it like any other ingredient that's now at our disposal to design hopefully the most relevant and intuitive and seamless interface, as you were talking about earlier, Nicholas. Like, it's a new set of ingredients that we can play with to hopefully show up for people in a more meaningful way. That's my hope.
Like to Kevin's point, we're looking at generative AI. They're extremely powerful. Everybody's just really focused on this particular technologies. And where is kind of design's participation in that? It's like the celebration of the technologist, the engineer, the AI scientist, whomever. And there isn't really a lot of acknowledgement or mention of the designer in that kind of dialogue. And so, how do we show up? Is it by, dialogue and continuing to try to drive awareness and education about design's role? I think that's important, but increasingly I feel like it's just kind of making to know, to Kevin's point. It's just like, if people want to know about design, we as designers will make things so that they can better understand like what our role and what our value is in this kind of dialogue that's happening right now. Because I will tell you critically, like, we cannot create these, I call them agentic experiences, because they leverage these generative AI technologies in addition to the output with these things called agents. But how do you have those things you can build all the infrastructure and the guts that require that. You can build all these agents, but if you don't have that experience layer or that design layer, to me, it just is all this kind of like machinery just flying around. Like it's cool, but what's the application, and how do we actually interact with it? How do we derive value from it? So I think, circling back directly to the question, how does design show up? I think it is really about bringing all these types of technologies to bear on specific human challenges, specific human experience challenges. Then I think, we really just show how we connect those dots together, how we become the translation layer between the human and then the technology. So yeah, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, absolutely.
I love it.
Kevin.
No, everything Nicholas described, I totally agree. I do think, like, if we can agree that change is hard, nonlinear change is even harder. And we are in nonlinear times thanks to all the paradigms that are at play. And unfortunately, what I get a little tired of seeing is like folks in power and immense amounts of privilege and wealth being celebrated on the cover of magazines for ingenuity, and they're feeding platforms that are just causing more and more harm, and maybe breeding wealth for them and their agenda, sure. But I would love to see celebrated on the cover of magazines the ethicist, the person like a Dr. Timnit Gebru, who gave warnings about some of the concerns around generative AI. She's probably one of the first to be visibly out there writing white papers and articles about these concerns, valid concerns, and to watch how industries have maybe treated folks like her and not given them a platform or the resources to shape what's possible. So I would love to just see like an awakening of what is valid concern, what is valid criticism, almost like constructive critical discourse. Like, we need to celebrate that more and bring parties together, and not just continue to celebrate power and, I hate to say, privilege, and only give voice to those people.
I'm conscious that the clock has caught up on us. As I wasn't surprised, I'm not at all surprised. But being the progress report, one of the things we like to ask our guests is, just for you in this context, what does progress look like? And obviously accelerating timelines and all that kind of change. So what's the time horizon for that? But over the next few years, Nicholas, maybe you could just talk a little bit about, well, in the field of design, what does progress look like for you?
Wow, that's such a awesome question. Because I think the obvious simple ones are the ones that you indicated, faster, more efficient, more productive. But I don't think that's necessarily the ones that inspire me for sure. When you're talking about like the kind of application of these technologies to solve the intractable problems, I think, I was reminded of before the age of AI, a kind of a critical insight and breakthrough in protein folding was not done by the biologists and the scientists. It was actually a graphic designer who's tried to visualize in her head what a protein folding kind of experience or description would look like. So she described it visually. And through that, all the scientists that had been thinking about it conceptually and trying to express what that actually was, they had their aha moment. They said, that's exactly it. But it was a designer who was able to reveal that, and it actually accelerated the field of not only protein folding, but the implications of that through medicine, pharma, biology, et cetera, because everyone now could actually understand what that looked like. They didn't have to try to form whatever conceptual image in their head. And so for me, like the progress of these things will be that it opens up these types of opportunities where we can then apply design in very novel ways that will show other people, how to even think about these things, because these things are so abstract oftentimes that, we try to wrestle with it, in our own individual fashion. But I think that designers, like one of their greatest gifts is just they're able to translate these very conceptual, abstract concepts in a way that is just much more palpable and understandable. And I think through that process, then everybody comes along. They're not excluded. And so that to me would be progress, is that these types of technologies allow us to open up the opportunity to figure out how to translate and to bridge these types of these technologies with the broader audience. Yeah.
Thank you, Nicholas. Kevin.
Yeah, there's definitely a from to in my mind. The from is like, I do feel like humanity at large is trapped in an unfortunate flywheel, arguably thanks to digital, but it's like a constant drone of marketers marketing and consumers consuming. And we speak oftentimes in our business conversations of the market funnel. Like, what can I do to get someone into the funnel to get them to click to buy or convert, and hit our OKRs and our KPIs. And I'm not saying I'm not a believer in value creation. I definitely want businesses to understand how they can unlock value, hopefully meaningful regenerative value. But I would love to break the market funnel speak and say, like, as a design field and even creative problem solvers at large, like, how do we actually interrogate how we best show up for people and planet on the terms that matter, because the world is so much smaller, it's moving so much faster. So can we get away from being extractive and exploitive? Can we move away from disrespecting culture because of how connected we are? Stopping to exploit an audience and treating them as a ingredient just for our product to work, versus like, how are we actually serving people? How are we showing up for people? And my maybe techno optimistic belief is, if we figure out how to do that, the business concern will take care of itself, and we will have loyalty, we will have retention if we treat people and planet in the right way. Because all these values, what I'm talking about, are value criteria of making sure that we're respectful of the constellation of value criteria that we need to satiate, and not. I think it's no longer acceptable to just like gloss over and move fast and break things. We need to move fast, sure, but with intention, and not be afraid to go slow, to go fast, and oscillate our rhythm to hopefully shape a more respectful, regenerative world versus the world that we're witnessing right now.
I don't want to speak out of turn, but I just wanted to say, hell yeah, that's awesome.
Nicholas, Kevin, thank you both very much for joining us this afternoon on the Progress Report. It's been an absolute joy for me. Hopefully you've enjoyed the conversation as well. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on the Progress Report. I hope you have enjoyed today's episode every bit as much as I have, but a really fascinating and insightful consideration of how important design is in the context of AI and the transformation it's driving. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please do check out other episodes in the series, and be sure to like, share and subscribe to the Progress Report.